Out. Now. The command didn't echo. It sliced through the room like it had been waiting for her, rehearsed, sharpened, delivered without hesitation as two security guards stepped in close. Not rough, but firm enough to make a point. Their hands hovering just long enough to say this wasn't a request. And Naomi Carter stood in the center of the private club's marble lounge, still, composed. Her black dress simple against a sea of tailored tuxedos and glittering gowns, every eye in the room lifting at once. Not out of concern but curiosity, the kind that watches before it decides whether to care. And the manager, a tall white man with a polished smile that never reached his eyes, stepped forward with that tone people hide behind policy. Members only, ma'am, you'll need to leave. As if the words themselves were enough to rewrite reality. And Naomi didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't reach for anything to prove herself. She just looked at him, steady, unreadable, like she had seen this moment before, because she had. Not here, not this room, but the same tone, the same assumption, the same quiet dismissal dressed up as procedure. And somewhere behind the bar a glass stopped mid-polish. A young server watching a second too long, sensing something didn't sit right, while across the lounge a couple exchanged glances, unsure but unwilling to speak, and the air shifted, not louder, just heavier, like the room itself was waiting to see how far this would go. You're at the wrong entrance. The manager added, softer now but sharper underneath, layering the insult in something that sounded almost helpful, and one of the guards gestured toward the door, a subtle push without pressure. A suggestion wrapped in authority, and Naomi's heel pivoted half an inch on the marble floor, not stepping back, not stepping forward, just anchoring her there, her silence stretching long enough to make people uncomfortable, long enough to turn attention into tension, and then she lowered her gaze for just a second, not in defeat but in thought, like she was measuring something no one else could see. And when she looked back up, something had changed, not her posture, not her expression, just the weight behind her eyes, calm, controlled, unshaken, the kind of calm that doesn't belong to someone being removed, the kind that belongs to someone letting a moment play out exactly as it needs to. And the manager mistook it. Of course he did. Mistook silence for compliance, composure for confusion, because that's how these moments always start, with someone certain they understand what they're looking at, certain they've already decided who belongs and who doesn't, and Naomi let that certainty sit. Let it breathe. Let the room settle into its mistake. Because she wasn't here to argue her way in. She was here for something else entirely, and no one in that room. Not the manager, not the guards, not the silent witnesses lining the edges of the scene, had any idea just how quickly their version of control was about to unravel. The silence did not break. It stretched, thin and sharp, until even the soft clink of crystal glasses behind the bar seemed out of place. And Naomi Carter remained exactly where she was, not resisting, not complying, simply existing in a way that disrupted the script they had already written for her. And the manager shifted his weight, just slightly, the first crack in his certainty, because something about her stillness did not match the outcome he expected. Ma'am, I am going to need you to cooperate, he said again, louder this time, as if volume could restore control. But Naomi's gaze did not move from his face, steady, almost curious, like she was studying him rather than listening. And one of the guards glanced sideways, a flicker of hesitation passing between them, subtle but real, because they had done this before, guided people out, redirected them. But this felt different, not louder, not dramatic, just heavier, like stepping into a situation that had already begun, unfolding before they arrived. And across the room, a young server leaned closer to the bar, whispering to the bartender. She does not look confused, and the bartender did not answer, just watched, polishing the same glass far longer than necessary, because now the room was paying attention, not openly, not yet, but enough that the manager could feel it, that quiet shift when an audience stops being passive, and he forced a polite smile that tightened at the edges. This is a private establishment, he continued, each word precise, controlled, practiced. We have standards, and that word lingered, standards, hanging in the air like something larger than policy, something older, and Naomi's lips pressed together for just a moment, not in anger, not in reaction, but in recognition, because she had heard that word before, in offices, in boardrooms, in interviews where decisions had already been made before she ever walked in. And for a brief second, the room around her blurred into memory, a younger version of herself standing in a different space. Different faces, same tone, same quiet dismissal wrapped in professionalism. And then it was gone, replaced by the present, sharper now, clearer, and she took a slow breath, controlled, deliberate, as if marking a line only she could see. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, measured, but it carried, cutting clean through the tension without rising. "You keep saying that like it explains something." And the manager's smile faltered, just slightly, because that was not the response he expected, not defensive, not apologetic, but precise. And one of the guards lowered his hand an inch, uncertainty creeping in where authority had been. And from the far side of the lounge, a man in a navy suit shifted in his seat, watching more closely now, and the quiet ripple spread, subtle but undeniable, because the moment had changed, not dramatically, not yet, but enough that the outcome no longer felt certain. And Naomi tilted her head just slightly, her eyes steady on the manager, and added, softer this time, almost conversational, "So tell me." And the pause that followed was not empty. It was loaded, deliberate, pulling the room in with it. "What exactly do you think I am doing wrong?" The question did not land softly. It settled into the room like a weight no one wanted to carry. And for the first time, the manager did not answer immediately, his mouth parting slightly before closing again, as if he needed to choose his words more carefully now, because the script had shifted and he could feel it slipping. "It is not about doing anything wrong," he finally said, forcing a calm that sounded thinner than before. "It is about access." And Naomi nodded once, slow, deliberate, as if acknowledging the logic while quietly dismantling it. And one of the guards glanced at the other again, their posture no longer as rigid, because now this was no longer a simple removal. It was a conversation unfolding in front of witnesses, and those witnesses were no longer passive. The man in the navy suit leaned forward, elbows on his knees, listening. The bartender stopped polishing altogether, glass still in hand, and the young server stepped half a pace closer without realizing it, drawn into the moment by something she could not name. And Naomi's voice came again, steady, precise. "Access requires a reason," she said, not challenging, not aggressive, just exact. And the manager's jaw tightened, because that was true. And truth in a moment like this was inconvenient. "You do not appear on our membership list," he replied, quicker now, leaning into certainty again, but it sounded rehearsed, thinner than before. And Naomi held his gaze, unblinking, letting the words sit between them. And for a brief second, she said nothing. And that silence worked harder than any argument could, because it forced everyone in the room to process what had just been said, to measure it against what they were seeing, a woman calm, composed, asking direct questions, and a response that felt less like explanation and more like assumption. And somewhere behind the bar, the bartender finally spoke under his breath, "That is not verification." And the server nodded, almost imperceptibly, and the manager heard the shift, even if he did not fully understand it. That subtle movement of attention turning into doubt, and he stepped forward half an inch, reclaiming space, reclaiming authority. "If you cannot verify your membership, then you cannot remain," he said, firmer now, doubling down. Because retreat was no longer an option, and Naomi's expression did not change, but something in her posture settled, like a decision had just been made, invisible to everyone else. And she glanced briefly toward the entrance, then back to him. And when she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost reflective, but it carried further than before. "So this is the part where you decide who belongs." And the manager opened his mouth to respond, but she continued, not louder, just more certain, "Based on what you see." And that landed differently, because now the room understood the shape of the moment, not just a policy, not just a misunderstanding, but something deeper, something familiar. And the man in the navy suit leaned back slowly, exhaling through his nose, and another guest shifted uncomfortably, because once something is named, even quietly, it is harder to ignore. And Naomi tilted her head just slightly, her eyes never leaving the manager, and added, calm as ever, "That is a lot of authority for someone who has not asked a single real question." The words did not fade. They lingered, echoing just enough to make the room aware of itself, aware of who was watching and who was being watched. And the manager's expression shifted again, not dramatically, but enough that the confidence he had been holding onto now felt heavier, harder to maintain. "We follow procedure here," he said, slower this time, as if choosing each word with more care. But the sentence landed weaker than the ones before it, because now it sounded like defense instead of authority, and Naomi let out a quiet breath, almost imperceptible, not frustration, not relief, just recognition, because she had heard that phrase too. Procedure, the word people use when they want structure to justify instinct. And for a moment she looked past him, not away, just beyond, taking in the room, the velvet chairs, the polished wood, the quiet wealth wrapped in subtle details. A space designed to signal exclusivity without ever saying the word out loud. And her gaze returned to him, steady as before. "Procedure usually starts with a question," she said, her tone still even, but sharper now, more defined. And that sentence moved through the room differently, because it was simple, undeniable, and the bartender shifted his stance, nodding faintly, while the man in the navy suit leaned forward again, elbows resting on his knees, fully engaged now, no longer pretending this was just background noise. And one of the guards cleared his throat quietly, not speaking, but the sound itself broke the illusion of total control, and the manager felt it, that subtle erosion of authority that does not happen all at once, but in small, undeniable shifts. And he straightened his posture, lifting his chin slightly as if posture alone could restore the balance. "If you have proof of membership, you are welcome to present it," he said, and this time it sounded less like a command and more like an offer, an opening he had not intended to give. And Naomi tilted her head slightly, considering him, considering the room, considering the weight of what had already been said without being fully acknowledged, and she reached down, slowly, deliberately, retrieving her phone from the floor where it had been resting untouched, her movements unhurried, controlled, every motion carrying intention. And for a brief second, the room leaned with her, attention narrowing, because now there was an expectation forming, a belief that this moment might resolve, that something would be shown, explained, corrected. And Naomi looked at the screen, her reflection faintly visible against the glass. And then she looked back up at him, not handing anything over, not unlocking anything, just holding it loosely in her hand. And she spoke again, softer than before, but somehow louder in impact. "You never asked for this." And the manager blinked, caught off guard, because she was right, and everyone in the room knew it, even if no one said it out loud. And that realization did not explode. It settled, spreading quietly from one person to the next, reshaping the moment in real time. And Naomi's voice followed, calm, unwavering. "You decided first." And the words hung there, undeniable, turning the entire interaction into something else entirely, something that could no longer be dismissed as routine. And the manager's silence stretched just long enough to confirm it, that this was no longer about policy, not really. And Naomi stood there, composed, unshaken, not proving anything, not yet, but making something far more powerful clear without raising her voice at all. The shift was no longer subtle. It was visible now, moving through the room like a quiet current that no one could ignore. And the manager felt it before he fully understood it, the loss of certainty, the way control had started to slip, not because anyone had taken it from him, but because it no longer held the same weight. And he cleared his throat, adjusting his stance again as if recalibrating in real time. "Then let me ask you now," he said, trying to recover ground, trying to reset the moment into something procedural again, something he could manage. "Can you verify your membership?" And this time it sounded different, not confident, not dismissive, but careful, almost cautious. And Naomi watched him for a second, her expression unchanged, but her eyes sharper now, more focused, as if the question itself had finally caught up to where the moment should have begun. And she nodded once, slow, deliberate, acknowledging the shift without rewarding it. And across the lounge, the man in the navy suit leaned back, folding his arms, a faint smile forming at the corner of his mouth as if he could see the structure of the situation rearranging itself. And the bartender set the glass down quietly, no longer pretending to work, fully invested now, while the young server stood still, her attention fixed on Naomi with something closer to respect than curiosity, and Naomi lifted her phone slightly, not presenting it, just holding it in view. And for a brief second it seemed like she might unlock it, might offer the proof they were now asking for. But she did not. Instead, she let the moment hang there again, stretching just long enough to remind everyone that timing matters, that order matters. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, precise, and impossible to ignore. "Now you want verification," she said. And it was not a question, it was a statement, and the manager's jaw tightened again because he heard it, the implication beneath it, and Naomi took one small step forward, not aggressive, not confrontational, just enough to close the distance by an inch, and that inch felt larger than it was, because it shifted the dynamic completely. And she continued, softer now, but clearer than anything else in the room. "After you decided I did not belong." And no one moved, no one interrupted, because the truth of it was too clean to challenge. And one of the guards lowered his hands fully now, stepping back half a pace without realizing it. His posture no longer aligned with removal, but with observation, and the manager hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough for the room to see that this was no longer certain, no longer controlled. And Naomi let that hesitation breathe, let it expand, before she added, almost conversational, "That is not how access works." And the sentence landed like a correction, not loud, not forceful, but definitive, and the man in the navy suit nodded once, slow, as if confirming something he already knew, while another guest shifted in her chair, her expression changing from passive to engaged. And Naomi glanced briefly at her phone again, then back to the manager, her gaze steady, unwavering. And in that moment it became clear that she was not withholding proof because she lacked it. She was withholding it because she understood something deeper, something more powerful than validation. And when she spoke again, her voice carried a new weight, not louder, but final in a way that made the room still. "You do not get to question me after you have already judged me." And this time there was no immediate response, no quick recovery, just silence, heavy and undeniable, as the balance of the entire room shifted one more step in her favor. The silence did not crack this time. It settled deeper, heavier, like the room itself had accepted that something irreversible had already begun, and the manager stood there with the weight of her words pressing against him, not loud, not aggressive, just undeniable. And for the first time he did not rush to fill the space, because there was nothing simple left to say, no quick line to restore order. And Naomi Carter remained exactly where she was, her posture relaxed but anchored, her presence no longer something to be managed, but something the room had to respond to. And one of the guards shifted, fully back now, hands dropping to his sides, his role quietly dissolving without instruction, while the other glanced toward the manager, waiting, uncertain, because the situation no longer matched the authority they had been given. And across the lounge the attention had fully turned, no one pretending anymore. Conversations paused mid-sentence, glasses left untouched, the entire room leaning into a moment that had become something more than a misunderstanding. And the manager finally spoke. But his voice had changed, the sharp edge gone, replaced by something more measured, more cautious. "There is no need to escalate this," he said, and the sentence revealed more than he intended, because escalation had already happened, just not in the way he expected. And Naomi's gaze did not soften, did not harden, it simply held steady, reflecting nothing back except clarity, and she tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words, and when she answered, her voice was quieter than before but carried further than anything else in the room. "You already did," she said, and that landed clean, final, because it named the moment exactly as it was, and the manager exhaled through his nose, a controlled breath that failed to hide the shift in his composure, and he glanced briefly toward the front desk, then back at her, recalculating, searching for a way to redirect what had already slipped beyond his control. And Naomi watched him do it, watched the calculation, the hesitation, the attempt to reframe, and for a brief second her eyes lowered, not in retreat but in memory, a flicker of something older passing through her, a younger version of herself standing in another room, hearing similar words delivered with the same tone, the same quiet certainty that she did not fit, and that memory did not linger, It sharpened, folding into the present, reinforcing something that no one else in the room could see. And when she looked back up, the calm was still there, but it had deepened, transformed into something more deliberate, more controlled, and she lifted her phone again, not to show it, not to unlock it, just holding it at her side like a tool she had not yet chosen to use. And she spoke again, each word precise, measured. "You treated me like a problem before you understood the situation." And the manager opened his mouth, but nothing came out, because there was no clean way to deny it now, not with the room watching, not with the moment fully formed. And Naomi took one small breath, steady and controlled, and added, softer now, but sharper in meaning, "So now we are going to do this differently." And the shift in her tone was subtle but unmistakable, not louder, not forceful, just decisive. And for the first time since she walked in, it became clear that she was no longer responding to the situation. She was about to take control of it. The moment did not explode. It tightened, pulling every eye, every breath, every ounce of attention toward Naomi Carter as she stood there no longer reacting but deciding. And that difference was subtle but absolute. The kind of shift that changes outcomes before anyone realizes it has happened. And the manager felt it immediately. That loss of ground that could not be regained by tone or posture. And he straightened again out of instinct, not authority. "What exactly are you suggesting?" he asked. And this time the question carried something new. Not dominance, not dismissal, but uncertainty. And Naomi did not answer right away. She let the question sit, let it stretch just long enough for the room to lean in, because timing was no longer working against her. It was working for her, and she lifted her hand slowly, bringing the phone up, her thumb resting near the screen but not touching it yet. And her voice came steady, controlled, unmistakably deliberate. "We are going to verify everything," she said, and the simplicity of it disarmed the room, because it sounded reasonable, almost obvious, but the weight behind it made it clear this was not the kind of verification they were used to. And the manager frowned slightly, trying to interpret what she meant, trying to regain footing in a situation that was no longer following his structure. "That is exactly what I asked for," he replied. But the confidence in his voice did not return. It hovered somewhere between assertion and doubt, and Naomi's gaze held his, unflinching, and she gave the smallest shake of her head, not dismissive, just corrective. "No," she said, and that single word landed harder than anything else she had said so far, because it drew a line, clean and undeniable, and she took one step to the side, not away, not retreating, just repositioning herself so the entire room could see her clearly. And now she was no longer framed by him. She stood on her own, centered, visible, and that visual alone shifted something deeper, something unspoken. And the bartender leaned forward slightly, resting both hands on the counter, fully invested now, while the man in the navy suit uncrossed his arms, attention sharpened, and even the guards remained still, no longer part of the action but witnesses to it. And Naomi finally tapped the screen, a single precise movement, and the faint glow reflected briefly across her face before she lowered the phone again, not showing anything, not yet. And she spoke, her tone even but carrying a new authority that did not need to announce itself. "You wanted proof to justify your decision," she said, and the manager's expression tightened again, because that was exactly what had happened. And Naomi continued, her voice cutting clean through the silence. "I am going to verify the decision itself." And that changed everything, because now the direction of scrutiny had reversed, and the room felt it immediately. That shift from her being questioned to the situation being questioned. And the manager took a small breath, steadying himself, but it was clear now that he was no longer leading the moment. He was inside it, reacting to it. And Naomi lowered her hand to her side again, her posture relaxed but anchored. And for the first time, there was something else in her presence. Not just calm, not just control, but authority, quiet and absolute. And she added, softer now but final in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. "And once we do that, we will see who actually belongs here." The words did not echo. They settled, heavy and irreversible. And for a moment, no one in the room moved because everyone understood something had just shifted beyond repair. The direction had changed, and there was no clean way back. And the manager stood there with that realization pressing against him, his posture still upright, but no longer convincing, like a structure that had not collapsed yet, but could not hold for much longer. And Naomi Carter remained exactly where she was, centered, composed, no longer part of the tension but the source of its resolution. And somewhere behind her the faint hum of the club's digital system flickered, subtle at first, almost easy to miss. A screen behind the bar refreshing once, then again, and the bartender noticed it before anyone else, his eyes narrowing slightly as he glanced at the display that had been static all evening, and the young server followed his gaze, her breath catching just slightly as she saw the interface shift, lines of information updating in real time, and she whispered, barely audible, "What is that?" But no one answered because now the room was watching something else unfold, something quiet but unmistakable, and the manager turned his head just enough to notice the movement, his eyes flicking toward the screen, and that was when the second shift hit, not emotional, not social, but structural, the kind that does not ask permission, and Naomi did not look back at the screen. She did not need to. Her gaze remained on him, steady, controlled, as if she already knew exactly what was happening behind her. And when she spoke again, her voice was calm, almost neutral, but it carried authority, in a way that did not need to raise itself. "Verification is already in progress," she said, and the manager's expression tightened, confusion now mixing with something closer to concern, because this was no longer within his control, no longer within his system, and the bartender stepped away from the counter slightly, leaning closer to the screen as more data populated, names, titles, access levels, shifting and aligning in a way that did not look like a simple update, and the man in the navy suit stood slowly from his chair, drawn forward by something he could not yet define, and the guards exchanged another glance, their roles now completely dissolved, replaced by the quiet awareness that they were no longer needed for anything, and Naomi's phone remained at her side, untouched now, because whatever she had initiated no longer required visible action, and the manager took a small step back without realizing it, his attention pulled between her and the system behind her, caught in a moment he could no longer control, and Naomi watched him, not with satisfaction, not with anger, just with clarity, and she added, softer now but final in its precision, "You thought access was something you controlled," and the screen behind her refreshed again, this time more sharply, a subtle alert appearing in the corner, and the bartender's voice slipped out under his breath, "That is not normal." And Naomi continued, her eyes never leaving the manager. "But access has always been something you answer to." And that sentence landed differently, because now the room could feel it, not just hear it, the shift from authority to accountability, and the manager's composure faltered for the first time in a way that could not be hidden, his silence no longer strategic but reactive, and Naomi stood there, still, grounded, as the system behind her continued to change, and for the first time since she walked in, it was clear that the outcome was no longer a question, it was already in motion. The room did not return to normal, it leaned forward, every detail sharpening as the system behind the bar continued to update, quiet but undeniable, and the bartender stepped fully away from his station now, eyes locked on the screen as lines of authority, ownership, and access began to reorganize in a way that did not match routine maintenance or simple verification, and the young server moved beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. "That is a board-level interface," and the words traveled farther than she intended, reaching the man in the navy suit who was now standing just a few feet closer, his expression shifting from curiosity to recognition, because he had seen systems like that before, not in public spaces, not in moments like this, and the manager heard it too. That phrase, board level, and something in his posture tightened again, not with control, but with awareness, the kind that arrives a moment too late. And he turned slightly, just enough to see the screen more clearly, and for the first time since this began, his confidence did not return, it stalled, replaced by a quiet calculation that no longer favored him, and Naomi Carter did not move. She did not look back. She did not acknowledge the screen or the whispers, because she did not need to. The shift was already visible in the room itself, in the way people stood, in the way they watched, in the way attention had moved away from her as a subject and toward her as a source, and when she spoke again, her voice was steady, grounded, carrying a clarity that no longer needed explanation. "You asked for access verification, she said, and the manager's gaze snapped back to her, caught between what he was seeing and what he was hearing, and Naomi continued, calm as ever. So now you are watching it happen. And the sentence landed with a different kind of weight, not emotional, not confrontational, but procedural in a way that mirrored his own language, turning it back on him without raising her tone, and the bartender leaned closer to the screen, his voice lower now, but more certain. There is a name at the top, he said, and the man in the navy suit stepped in beside him, reading quickly, his eyes narrowing as recognition settled in fully, and he exhaled once, slow, controlled, before speaking just loud enough for the space around him to hear. That is not a member. Listing. And the manager froze, not physically, but internally, because the pieces were no longer aligning the way he expected, and Naomi's gaze remained fixed on him, unshaken, unwavering, as if this moment had always been leading here, and she took one small breath, steady and deliberate, and added, softer now but sharper in meaning, you assumed I needed permission, and the manager did not respond, because now the assumption itself was exposed, visible to everyone in the room, and the screen refreshed again, a final adjustment, and the bartender's voice came out clearer this time, no longer uncertain. It is her, he said, and the words did not echo, they settled, heavy and undeniable, and Naomi did not react, did not confirm, did not deny. She simply stood there, composed, as the room caught up to a truth that had already been in place long before she walked through the door, and the manager's silence stretched, no longer strategic, no longer controlled, just real, as the moment fully turned against him. The words hung in the air, simple and final, and for a moment no one moved because everyone understood exactly what had just been said without needing it repeated, and the manager stood there with his eyes fixed somewhere between Naomi Carter and the screen behind her, caught in a space where denial was no longer possible, but acceptance had not fully settled in, and the room felt it. That precise instant where power does not shift loudly but decisively, and Naomi did not rush to fill it. She did not step forward or raise her voice. She simply let the silence do what it needed to do, and that made it heavier, more undeniable, and the man in the navy suit exhaled slowly, his gaze moving from the screen back to Naomi with a clarity that had replaced any earlier doubt, while the bartender straightened fully, no longer observing but understanding, and even the young server's posture changed, her uncertainty replaced by something closer to certainty, and the manager finally spoke, but the tone that had once carried authority now sounded thinner, carefully measured. There must be some kind of misunderstanding, he said, and the sentence landed exactly as it was, an attempt to rebuild ground that no longer existed, and Naomi's expression did not shift, not even slightly, her gaze steady, her presence grounded, and she took one slow breath before answering, her voice calm, controlled, but carrying a clarity that cut through every corner of the room. There is no misunderstanding, she said, and the directness of it left no space for reinterpretation, and she lifted her chin just slightly, not in defiance, not in pride, but in simple alignment with the truth she was stating, and then she continued, each word deliberate, each word placed exactly where it needed to be. You removed me from a space I oversee, and the sentence reframed everything in an instant, not as accusation, not as emotion, but as fact, and the manager's composure faltered again, his eyes narrowing slightly as he tried to process the weight of what she had just said, and Naomi held his gaze, unwavering, and added, softer now, but sharper in its impact. Not because you verified anything, and she paused, just long enough for the room to lean in again, but because you assumed everything, and that landed differently. Because now it was not just about her, it was about the process, the decision, the structure that had been exposed in front of everyone, and the man in the navy suit nodded once, slow and certain, while another guest shifted closer, no longer distant from the moment, but part of it, and Naomi took one small step forward, closing the space between them just enough to redefine the dynamic entirely, and her voice lowered slightly, not quieter but more focused, carrying a weight that did not need volume. And now, she said, you are going to answer for that, and the manager did not respond, because there was nothing left to say that would restore what had already been lost, and Naomi stood there, composed, steady, no longer proving anything, no longer waiting, but holding a presence that made it clear the next move was no longer his to make. The room did not erupt. It shifted, quietly but completely, like a structure realigning under pressure it could no longer resist, and the manager felt it in the way no one looked to him anymore, in the way attention had moved past him, through him, and settled on Naomi Carter with a clarity that could not be reversed. And for the first time since this began, he was no longer the center of the moment. He was its consequence, and he opened his mouth again, searching for something, anything, that might stabilize what was unraveling. If there has been an error, he began, but the words faltered before they could fully form, because even he could hear it now, the weakness in the frame he was trying to rebuild, and Naomi did not interrupt. She did not need to. She let him reach the edge of that sentence and stop there, because silence was doing more work than any rebuttal could, and the man in the Navy suit stepped forward now, not aggressively, not dramatically, just enough to be seen, his voice calm but clear. "This is not an error," he said, and the statement landed with weight because it came from outside the conflict, from someone who had been watching, measuring, understanding, and the manager's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Naomi, and in that brief movement it became clear that he no longer knew where authority stood. And the bartender spoke next, quieter but just as certain. The system updated her status above board-level access, and that phrase settled into the room like a final confirmation, not speculation, not interpretation, but fact. And Naomi stood there, composed, her expression unchanged, not triumphant, not reactive, just present in a way that made everything else adjust around her. And she took a slow breath, steady and controlled, before speaking again, her voice calm, even, but carrying a finality that could not be mistaken. "You asked who belongs here," she said, and the manager did not respond, because now the answer was no longer his to define, and Naomi's gaze remained fixed on him, unwavering, as she continued. "That question has already been answered," and the words did not need emphasis. They carried their own, and across the room, a subtle shift occurred, not applause, not noise, but alignment, people standing straighter, looking differently, recognizing something they had not fully seen before, and one of the guards stepped back. Another half-pace, his presence now entirely removed from the situation, while the young server straightened beside the bar, her earlier hesitation replaced by certainty, and Naomi took one small step forward, not closing distance but redefining it, and her voice lowered slightly, more focused now, more precise. "The real question," she said, "is who made the decision to remove me?" And the manager's posture stiffened again. But this time it was not authority, it was awareness, because now the direction had fully reversed, and Naomi did not raise her voice, did not change her tone. She simply held the moment exactly where it needed to be, and finished, and what that decision says about this place. And the silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy with recognition, as the entire room understood that what had just happened was no longer a private interaction. It was a standard being set in real time. The silence did not linger this time. It settled into something heavier, something final, and the manager stood there with the weight of every word pressing against him, not as accusation but as exposure. And for the first time he did not try to speak over it, did not attempt to redirect or reframe, because the structure he had been standing on was no longer there, and Naomi Carter remained exactly where she was, grounded, composed, her presence now the axis around which the entire room had shifted, and behind her the system screen stabilized, no longer updating. The information locked in place, clear and undeniable, and the bartender stepped back slowly, his earlier uncertainty replaced by quiet certainty, while the man in the Navy suit nodded once, as if confirming something that could no longer be questioned, and Naomi took a slow breath, not to steady herself but to mark the moment. And when she spoke again, her voice was calm, measured, but carried a final authority that no one in the room could ignore. "You did not just remove me," she said, and the manager's eyes lifted to meet hers, held there by something he could not escape, and she continued, each word deliberate, each word placed with precision. "You exposed how decisions are made here." And the sentence moved through the room like a quiet current, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable, and Naomi took one small step forward, Not closing space, but redefining it entirely, and her tone remained even, controlled. But now it carried something else, consequence, and that has already been recorded. She added, and the manager's expression tightened again, not in resistance, but in realization, because now the implications were no longer contained within this room, and Naomi did not pause, did not soften. She simply continued, her voice steady, unwavering. This club does not operate without oversight, she said. And that word oversight landed differently now, heavier, more precise, and she lifted her phone slightly, not to show anything, just enough to make the connection clear. And oversight responds when standards are broken, and the room felt it. That shift from moment to outcome, from tension to consequence, and the manager's posture changed again, not collapsing but adjusting, like someone who understood that the next step was no longer theirs to control. And Naomi held his gaze for one more second before adding, softer now, but sharper than anything she had said before. You asked for verification, and the pause that followed was not empty. It was exact. This is it. And the sentence closed the loop completely, leaving no space for reinterpretation, and across the room the alignment was complete. No one questioning, no one interrupting, because the truth had moved from uncertainty to clarity, and Naomi stood there, composed, unshaken, not raising her voice, not claiming victory, just allowing the moment to settle exactly where it belonged. And for the first time since she walked in, the room no longer felt like a place she had been removed from. It felt like a place that had just been corrected. The room did not return to what it was. It could not, because something fundamental had already shifted and settled into place. And Naomi Carter stood there for a moment longer, not to prove anything, not to extend the moment, but to let it finish exactly where it needed to, complete and undeniable. And the manager remained still across from her, no longer searching for words, no longer attempting to regain control, because control was no longer part of the equation. And in that stillness, the truth of the situation became fully visible, not just to him but to everyone watching. And Naomi took a slow step forward, not toward him but past him, her movement smooth, unhurried, as if the space itself had already adjusted to her presence. And no one stopped her, no one spoke, because there was nothing left to question. And as she passed, the guards stepped aside without being asked, their earlier certainty replaced by quiet acknowledgement. And behind her the room began to breathe again. Not loudly, not all at once, but in small, subtle ways. Conversations resuming in low tones, glasses lifted again, but nothing quite the same, because everyone had witnessed something that did not disappear when the moment ended. And Naomi paused briefly near the center of the lounge, not turning fully, just enough to let her voice carry once more, calm, steady, precise. This was never about access, she said, and the words moved through the room with clarity, not sharp, not harsh, but exact. It was about assumption, and she let that sit for a fraction of a second before continuing, softer now, but heavier in meaning. And assumption has consequences. And she did not raise her voice, did not look for reaction, because she did not need it. The room had already responded in the only way that mattered, by understanding, and she turned slightly then, her gaze sweeping the space once, not to claim it, but to acknowledge it. And in that glance there was no anger, no triumph, just presence, grounded and complete. And then she continued, walking deeper into the lounge, not as someone entering for the first time, but as someone who had always belonged there. And the manager remained where he was, the weight of the moment settling fully around him, not loud, not dramatic, but permanent in a way that could not be undone. And across the room the man in the navy suit watched her go with a slow nod, while the bartender returned to his station with a different kind of focus. And the young server stood a little straighter, as if something had shifted inside her as well. And Naomi did not look back. She did not need to, because the point had already been made without force, without volume, without spectacle. And as she reached the far side of the lounge, her voice, quieter now, but no less certain, carried one final line that settled into the space like a standard being set. Respect is not granted, she said. It is revealed. And then she kept walking, leaving behind a room that would not forget what it had just learned.